The sound of distant drums echoes across the cold morning mist. The year is 1775, and the world stands on the edge of transformation. In the small towns of the American colonies, men and women awaken to something far greater than themselves. An idea, a belief, a burning dream called freedom. They were not soldiers. They were farmers, blacksmiths, printers, and merchants. Ordinary people living simple lives, yet destined to create extraordinary history. What drove them was not wealth or power. It was the hunger to be free, to break the invisible chains of tyranny that had ruled them for generations. This is the story of how a nation was born from courage, from pain, and from the undying will to fight for dreams. The American Revolution wasn't just a war of muskets and cannons. It was a war of hearts and beliefs, a fire that taught the entire world that the human spirit cannot be chained. The spark of rebellion. Long before the first shot was fired, the seeds of revolution were already planted. The 13 colonies lived under British rule, paying taxes to a king they would never see, obeying laws they never agreed to. The weight of oppression grew heavier each year, but so did the courage in their hearts. It began with voices, brave, unshaken voices that refused to be silent. Men like Samuel Adams, John Hancock, and Patrick Henry stood in crowded halls and thundered words that stirred souls. Give me liberty or give me death. These were not just speeches, they were battle cries for the generations yet unborn. Every word was a spark, and soon those sparks set fire to the spirit of the people. From Boston to Philadelphia, from the harbors to the farms, whispers of rebellion turned into roars of determination. The Boston Tea Party became a symbol of defiance. Ordinary men, disguised and fearless, throwing the chains of their oppressors into the sea. They knew the price of freedom would be high, but they also knew the cost of silence was higher. The birth of courage. April 19th, 1775, the world changed forever. At Lexington and Concord, the first shots of the revolution were fired. Nobody knows who pulled the trigger, but those shots became known as the shot heard round the world. A few hundred farmers and townsmen stood face to face with the most powerful army on earth, the British Redcoats. Outnumbered, outgunned, and untrained, they stood their ground. And when the smoke cleared, history had taken its first breath of liberty. Those men were not soldiers. They were farmers, blacksmiths, printers, and merchants. Ordinary people living simple lives, yet destined to create extraordinary history. What drove them was not wealth or power. It was the hunger to be free, to break the invisible chains of tyranny that had ruled them for generations. The revolution had begun. The struggle of hope. The early days were filled with chaos and uncertainty. The Continental Army, led by George Washington, faced hunger, freezing winters, and endless defeats. But in every loss, there was learning. In every setback, there was resilience. In the bitter cold of Valley Forge, Washington's soldiers stood barefoot in snow, their clothes torn, their stomachs empty, yet their hearts burned with fire. They were not fighting because they were told to. They were fighting because they believed. Washington himself stood as a symbol of unbroken strength. His words to his men echoed through the icy wind. We must either conquer or die. He was not just leading soldiers, he was leading a movement, a cause that would echo through the centuries. The people behind the front lines, mothers, wives, blacksmiths, and children, all played their part. They stitched uniforms, carried supplies, and whispered prayers for victory. The revolution was not only fought by men with muskets, it was carried on the backs of every soul who refused to surrender. The power of unity. When 13 colonies stood as one, the impossible became possible. They came from different regions, different beliefs, and different lives, yet they shared a common dream. That unity was their greatest weapon. They knew freedom couldn't be given, it had to be earned. And so they fought not as Virginians, not as New Yorkers, but as Americans, one people, one cause, one destiny. The Declaration of Independence, signed on July 4th, 1776, was more than ink on parchment. It was the heartbeat of a new world. Thomas Jefferson's words thundered through time. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. It was a promise, not only to themselves, but to all humanity, that freedom is worth every sacrifice. The dream that would not die. The war raged on, years passed, battles were won and lost, but the spirit of the revolution never wavered. When darkness fell, hope lit the night. In 1781 at Yorktown, the impossible became reality. The British Army surrendered and the bells of freedom rang across the land. Men wept, women shouted, and the dream that began as a whisper had become the voice of a nation. But the real victory wasn't on the battlefield, it was in the hearts of every person who believed that one dream could change the world. Legacy of the Revolution. The American Revolution was more than a chapter in history. It was a message to humanity. It said, "No power can enslave those who choose to be free." From that fire of rebellion rose the foundations of democracy, equality, and human rights. Nations across the globe would rise, inspired by the courage of a people who refused to kneel. The revolution proved that the greatest weapon is not the sword, but the will to fight for what is right.
The smoke of battle has cleared, but the echoes of courage still roll across time. The year is 1783, and the Treaty of Paris has been signed. The colonies are now free. A new nation stands where oppression once ruled. But freedom, as they would soon learn, is not an end, it is a beginning. The American people were not handed an easy road. The revolution gave them liberty, but liberty came with the burden of responsibility. The real challenge was just beginning, to build a nation that could live up to the ideals they had fought for.